Today I'm going to tell you a super classic suspense thriller film. It doesn't have scary scenes, but it can make you tremble and shiver all over. The details laid out inside and the highly reversed plot at the end make you feel even more thoughtful and fearful after watching it. It is The Master Key that has been given a high score of 8.0 by nearly 400,000 netizens. The story begins with a female caregiver named Caroline, whose job is to take care of dying elderly people. Due to his dislike for the hospital's rough treatment of the elderly, the kind-hearted man resigned from his job as a caregiver. On his way home, while packing up his things, a job advertisement about taking care of stroke elderly people caught his attention. Joe Exayan's $1,000 package includes food and accommodation, and the tempting conditions have also led Caroline to decide to go for an interview tomorrow. In the evening, he told his best friend Jaime about this decision, but Jaime still advised him to consider it carefully. After all, the place was remote and far away, but Caroline still decided to give it a try. The next day, Caroline drove to the interview venue. As soon as she entered the door, Caroline saw a desolate villa. When she approached the door to shout out for the owner, no one responded to her. Caroline had no choice but to come inside the house, but the statue next to her almost startled Caroline. She shouted and walked forward. When she reached the end of the house, she finally saw an old woman trimming the hair of a person in a wheelchair. Just as she was about to ask, a voice behind her suddenly interrupted her. The man's name is Luke, and he is a real estate lawyer. He helped the director of the house publish the recruitment information, and the old woman in front of him is the owner of the house. The old lady's name is Mary, and it is her husband Ben sitting in a wheelchair, who is the person Caroline will be taking care of next. As the recruitment information was released by Luke did not wait for Caroline to introduce himself before introducing his relevant information to Mary. But Mary didn't even shout before turning around and leaving, seeming not very satisfied with Caroline. Immediately after, Mary called Luke aside. It turned out that Mary despised Caroline for not being the man's mouth, but Luke said that no one else wanted to come here except Caroline, and they had no choice. Mary nodded helplessly upon hearing this. So, Caroline naturally got this job and quickly moved to this villa with her luggage. But when he packed everything up, he discovered something strange. The place where the mirror was originally placed in the room didn't even have a mirror, and as a newcomer, he didn't even care. Subsequently, Caroline came to Ben's room and gave him a brief greeting, but just as he picked up Ben's hand and was about to lift the blanket up a bit, Ben suddenly grabbed his hand and stared at him intently, as if there was something he wanted to say to him. But at that moment, Mary walked over from behind, and upon hearing the sound, Ben immediately released his hand. It turned out that Mary had come to feed Ben medicine. Mary immediately instructed her to take care of some of Ben's matters, and Caroline curiously asked about everything about the house. Originally, Mary and her wife moved in 40 years ago and bought the house from a brother and sister, but the siblings died of a stroke shortly after selling their house. But what surprised Caroline was that Mary, in order to show her respect for the original homeowner, actually left their childhood photos behind. When Caroline picked up the photo frame to look at it, a photo of a black couple with siblings fell out from behind with her arm open. The relationship between the few seemed unusual, and Caroline, who had just arrived, did not inquire too much. Then Mary handed him a master key, saying that it could open most of the rooms in the house. Immediately afterwards, Caroline curiously asked a question. May you not sell you? In the following days, Caroline began taking care of Ben's work. Just as he pushed Ben out to bask in the sun, Mary expressed her hope that Caroline would help him go to the attic to pick up a box of seeds. Soon, Caroline arrived at the attic with the master key in her hand. But just as he was rummaging through boxes and cabinets looking for seeds, the strange noise coming from the attic camera caught his attention. Driven by curiosity, he slowly walked forward and realized that there was actually another door in the camera. Unknown speculations also came from inside, as if someone was constantly pushing and shoving the door. So he rubbed open the oil bucket in front of him and was about to reach out and grab the door handle to open it. Suddenly, the door stopped moving, which made him even more curious. Just as he was mentally prepared to open the door, he found that the door seemed to be locked. Subsequently, he took out the master key from his body and prepared to unlock it, but the key in his hand could not be opened. Meanwhile, the door of the colleague's attic suddenly closed, which frightened Caroline and she hurriedly left with the seed in hand. But just after he left, the eerie noise rang out again, as if there were some undisclosed secrets inside. Soon, Caroline, who had finished delivering the seeds, raised her doubts to Mary. Mary immediately stated that she had not opened the door since he moved in, and she didn't know what it looked like inside. Mary was about to leave after speaking, and then Caroline asked again, which seemed to be the wind in the attic. Does his stroke have any connection to that door? But Mary doesn't seem to want to answer this question, indicating that she has doubts. You can ask him in person. Quickly arrived, Caroline, who was awakened by thunder in the middle of the night, heard a strange noise coming from upstairs, so he came to Ben's room with the master key to check. But at the moment he opened the door and turned on the lights, Ben, who was originally unable to move, disappeared. He panicked and searched everywhere, finally realizing that Ben had climbed out of the window in the heavy rain. Looking at Ben lying by the eaves, Caroline shouted not to move, but Ben didn't listen completely. As a result, he fell from the eaves the next second, so Caroline immediately rushed downstairs regardless of everything. When Caroline came downstairs to help Ben was still making a crazy vow to climb forward, and soon Mary, who heard the commotion, rushed over as well. Mary immediately asked Caroline to bring the wheelchair upstairs, but just as Caroline was about to take it downstairs, she saw that Ben's bedsheet was written, "Help me." Although Caroline couldn't understand why Ben was like this, she still hid the sheets she brought with her first. When Caroline was about to get into the wheelchair with Ben in a disheveled state, Ben suddenly looked at him again with that helpless gaze, staring at him with all his might. The next day, lawyer Luke arrived here for some unknown reason. Caroline also told Luke about everything that happened last night, and even showed Luke the sheets found in this room last night. Strangely enough, when Caroline took it out, the words "help me" on it disappeared. Caroline suspected that she had hallucinations due to being too flustered last night, but she still told Luke about what she had felt in the past few days. Ben's eyes made me feel like he was asking for help from me. Before Caroline could finish speaking, Mary's appearance interrupted everything. Originally, Mary came to discuss real estate matters with Luke. After sending Mary away, Luke left a business card for Caroline before leaving, saying that he could come to him if there were any problems in the future. After an unknown amount of time, Caroline, who was trying to figure everything out, came to Gron again. He arrived at the eerie door before, and this time he finally understood why the door couldn't be opened last time. It turned out that half of the key was broken inside, so he took off his hairpin as a clip, took out the broken half of the key, and then inserted it again with the master key. If nothing unexpected happened, he really opened it. At the moment he walked in, there were things he had never seen before. He looked around and found an ancient book in a corner. When he opened it, he saw the black couple photo he had seen before again. One of the pages actually has a strange pattern painted on it, with the words "protective curse" marked on it. This made Caroline even more puzzled, and then he discovered a strange ring. In the following search, he also found an old record with the word "sacrifice" on it. Before leaving, Caroline also discovered all the missing mirrors inside the house, all of which were hidden in the attic. What Caroline didn't know was that there was an eye secretly staring at him outside the door at this moment. Caroline, full of doubts, immediately returned to her home in town. She placed the old record on the phonograph, wanting to hear what the so-called sacrifice was. However, it was filled with words similar to prayers, and she couldn't understand what was going on. Filled with doubts, she came to the bar and told her best friend about her doubts. My best friend said it's a bit like the previous witchcraft confusion, and her aunt used to be very obsessed with her. And I heard his aunt say that curvature is not harmful to people, it's usually a psychological thing. As long as you don't believe in its existence, you won't be harmed. Although Caroline doesn't believe in so-called witchcraft, her heart is still full of curiosity. Late at night, Caroline returned to the villa and came to visit as usual. Looking at the traces of the mirror being removed from the wall, he determined that Mary must be hiding something, so he quietly placed a mirror in this room. The next day, Mary, who saw the mirror, immediately found her sleeping calories and loudly questioned Caroline why she had left the mirror in Ben's room. Faced with Mary's questioning, Caroline simply didn't pretend. He said he had already entered the house that had never been opened before. If he couldn't solve his doubts, then he would roll up the bed now. Mary, who was feeling helpless, then took Caroline outside and talked about everything about the villa. About 100 years ago, a banker named Thorpe and their servants lived here, but this person was not a good person and specialized in deceiving the poor for money. There is a black couple living in the attic, which is the one Caroline showed in the photo before. What the banker doesn't know is that both of them are magicians. One day, the banker held a banquet where all the big shots attended one after another. However, just as the banquet was about to end, the banker's 2 children disappeared without a trace. So all the guests present were helping to search, and finally, one of them found the child in the attic. What surprised everyone was that black couples seemed to be teaching their children how to use witchcraft. The banker who saw this scene immediately became furious. Although the 2 children later claimed that they had voluntarily proposed it to the black couple, the banker, who had already been enraged, set fire to them and burned them to death. Shortly after the incident, the banker's career plummeted, and soon after, he killed his wife and committed suicide by raising a gun. Later people said it was the revenge of the black couple, and their children naturally inherited this place. They didn't leave until he completely bought it, but they didn't explain why the house was locked or why there were no mirrors inside. But then he said that he had read several books about witchcraft recently, and only then did he understand why there could be no mirrors. That is, he would see the black couple inside the mirror. Even he learned from books that using red brick powder can ward off evil spirits. For this, he also sprinkled a circle of red brick powder all over the outside of the house. Although Caroline didn't believe in any ghost talk, he still chose to stay here. On that day, Caroline, who was taking a shower for Ben, looked at herself in a mirror and didn't see anything strange. However, after a while, he picked up the mirror again and planned to give Ben a try. But at the moment Ben saw the mirror, Ben suddenly felt like he was going crazy. His body was constantly twitching, and Ben's reaction seemed to shake Caroline's view of ghosts and monsters. So Caroline drove non-stop to her best friend's aunt, and then told her all of Ben's symptoms. The other party immediately prepared some things for Caroline and explained how to use them to him. It quickly arrived at night, and Caroline arranged everything according to the instructions given by the other party. She then wrote a spell and began to recite it. Soon, Ben had a reaction. Ben, who had never spoken to Caroline before, actually called out Caroline's name and kept saying words to save me. At this moment, Caroline seemed to also believe in the existence of witchcraft. At the same time, Mary downstairs seemed to feel the abnormality upstairs, and then rushed upstairs without stopping. When he arrived, Caroline had already packed everything up and was ready to leave. At the moment she walked out of the room, Caroline finally breathed a sigh of relief. But Ben's performance just now convinced Caroline that Mary still had something hidden from her. That night, Caroline had nightmares, but the black couple kept appearing in his nightmares, even dreaming of scenes of black couples practicing witchcraft. When he woke up from his nightmare, he even seemed to see Mary sneaking out of his room from the mirror. Everything that had happened before, coupled with Ben's repeated requests for help, led him to secretly take a camera to the attic the next day, record everything here with the camera, and then find Luke with everything he found. For this, he also found the caregiver who had taken care of Ben before with Luke, but the previous caregiver advised him to leave there as soon as possible. So Luke took Caroline and planned to go back to the villa to pack up and leave. Halfway through, Caroline saw the gas station he had been to before, because he remembered seeing red brick powder scattered at the entrance of the gas station before. Perhaps the people inside had some knowledge of witchcraft. At the moment they walked in, Caroline heard the familiar music again and even said the name of the record to the old woman inside as a sacrifice. The old woman was also surprised when she heard it. She then asked him how he knew and said that offering sacrifices is the most powerful magic that can make people immortal, but the prerequisite is that another person must be sacrificed, and then the caster's soul can be exchanged with the sacrifice's soul. Then the caster can occupy the body of the sacrificed person, and in this way, eternal life can be achieved by reciprocating back and forth. And this magic was discovered by the black couple, but they were killed just before they learned it. Caroline, who returned to the villa, was even more convinced that Ben was trapped here, so he hoped that Luke could join him tonight to rescue Ben. But Luke said that Caroline should first go to the house to collect evidence of Ben being trapped, and then wait until the next day to apply for a search order from the police before helping Ben. As Luke left, Caroline rushed to the room to pack her things and prepare to leave without stopping. But when he opened the suitcase, he found that the old record hidden inside had disappeared for no reason. So Caroline, who felt strange, brought some red brick powder and, while Mary was not paying attention, sprinkled it on the entrance of her room door. Then he called Mary and lied that the roof seemed to be leaking, hoping he could come in and take a look. But Mary evaded it for various reasons, just not crossing the red brick and powder line. Mary's various performances also made Caroline more convinced that he was definitely not a good person. In no time, Caroline arrived at Ben's room and informed him of the news of leaving tonight. She even poured out the medicine that Ben usually took, and then brought a bottle of sleeping pills and injected them into Mary's regular sugar with each shot. Then Mary downstairs called Caroline to have dinner together. At this moment, the two people sitting at the dining table seemed to be well aware that Mary's tea this time did not contain any sugar cubes, and Caroline dared not touch the food in front of her. Just as the two people on the table were in an awkward situation, the power system in the room seemed to suddenly cut off due to the impact of lightning, and Mary left to fetch the candles. Caroline also secretly poured the sleeping pills into Mary's teacup during the gap between Mary's departure. In no time, Mary began to tremble. Caroline tore her face at the sight and said she would take Ben away later. Mary, who had fallen to the ground, surprisingly took out a strange pattern from her pocket and then started drawing it on the ground with chalk. However, Mary, who had taken the sleeping pill, was already powerless. Caroline, who had snatched the pattern, immediately found that the bottom of the pattern was written with the word shelter, as if Mary had just drawn a spell for wall protection. This also made Caroline more convinced of the fact that Mary murdered her husband. In order to find more evidence, Caroline immediately went to Mary's room and searched for evidence. Here, he saw that under Mary's bed there were magic seeds painted with wall protectors, and even found the bedsheet with the word "Save Me" on it. What surprised him even more was that a small handful of his hair appeared here. Although he doesn't know what his purpose is, it still makes his hair stand on end. Quickly, he had planned to leave with his car, but when he drove to the entrance, he realized that the door had already been locked. However, the current situation was no longer so serious, so he crashed from Ming to the door. The horsepower of the car seemed to be insufficient, and the door only slightly opened. It was he who reversed the car and planned to try again. But the second time, due to my own mishandling, I collided directly with the nearby flower bed, and the car completely sucked in at this moment. I don't know if Caroline didn't take the medicine forcefully enough, or if Mary had a strong physical condition. Now he has gradually come to his senses. Mary, who heard the commotion, also planned to carry a gun and prepare to come find Caroline. And Caroline outside saw that the car couldn't start, so he planned to hide it in a small wooden house next to him first, and then go to town alone to seek help. Caroline, who had settled down in the mansion, was about to secretly leave when she saw Mary already walking out with a gun on her shoulder. Fortunately, Caroline noticed a small boat not far away, so she decided to row the boat and escape from here. Fortunately, Mary only discovered him when she was about to leave, and Caroline managed to escape from here smoothly. Caroline, who returned to town, rushed to Luke's place without stopping. He told Luke everything he had found, but before he could finish speaking, Luke's phone rang. It turned out to be Mary calling. At the beginning, Luke was still talking on the phone in front of him, but in no time, the reason for recording the phone had already disappeared from his sight. Just as Luke was on the phone, the spy Caroline discovered that the table was covered in her own photos, and she even saw the eerie ring she had found in the attic before. She also found a master key in the drawer. Although Caroline realized something was wrong with this matter, before he could react, Luke suddenly grabbed him tightly with a rope from behind. Sure enough, Luke and Mary are together. Quickly, Luke drove Caroline back to the villa overnight, and at this moment, Mary had already waited again. Caroline also understood that Mary intended to trap him under the pressure of the two. Caroline also revealed Ben's whereabouts, so Mary immediately went to find Ben. Before leaving, she specifically instructed Luke not to harm her. After all, she was the one who would sacrifice later. So Caroline disregarded Luke's threat and rushed into her room. Luke also dared not enter because of the red brick powder on the ground. Caroline also took advantage of this and broke open the window to come outside. Then, she used broken glass to break free from her constraints and quickly climbed to the second floor. She then found the red brick powder she had prepared before and planned to sprinkle it all over the door of the room. But just then, Mary suddenly appeared in front of him and grabbed him, and the two of them immediately engaged in a fight. How could the elderly Mary be Caroline's opponent? In no time, Caroline threw her downstairs. Luke saw Mary lying on the ground and couldn't get up, so he shouted angrily. At this moment, the ground phone caught Caroline's attention, so she picked up the phone and called 911, intending to tell her best friend about her predicament. At the same time, Molly, who was kicked downstairs, only broke his foot, so he sat on the elevator and came upstairs. Caroline, who was on the phone with her best friend in the room, had not finished speaking when the phone went silent. Mary had already arrived upstairs, and the phone line had been cut by him. Caroline, who had no choice but to walk towards the higher attic, only to find that the decoration in the attic seemed to be about to hold a sacrificial ceremony. Caroline, who saw this scene, seemed to have lost her mind a bit, and at this moment, he suddenly thought of the protective spell. Following the instructions on the blueprint, he found everything he needed. Then, following the steps on the blueprint, he lit the candle, drew the pattern, sprinkled a circle of lime powder on the pattern, and then cut off a small tuft of his own hair. Finally, he used his own blood to press on the spell. After everything was done, Mary also pushed open the door and came here. At this moment, Caroline's confidence was protected by a protective spell, and Mary couldn't do anything to him. But Mary's next sentence directly plunged Caroline into a valley. All from learning. It turned out that everything before was a decision between him and Luke, with the aim of making him believe in the existence of the wizard. If he didn't believe it, the sacrificial ceremony would not be completed. As soon as Mary finished speaking, Luke gave up the old record. As the music melody played, Caroline's body also became immobile. Meanwhile, Luke outside was also reciting a spell, and Mary was hiding behind the mirror. As Caroline's consciousness gradually became uncontrollable, she constantly switched to the appearance of others in the mirror. Immediately after, the whole house began to tremble, and Mary pushed the mirror towards Caroline. In the end, the mirror turned into the appearance of a black witch. As the mirror hit Caroline, all the candles in the room went out, and both of them fell into a coma at the same time. I don't know how long it took, but Caroline slowly woke up. But the first thing he did when he woke up was pick up the cigarette and lighter that Mary had dropped on the ground, skillfully lit a cigarette, and then said to Mary on the ground, "Thank you, child." Immediately afterwards, Luke arrived here and shouted to Caroline, who was smoking, "Who is it?" And Caroline also responded to Luke, "Justify." From then on, all the truth emerged, and the two people in front of them were the black couple of the past. They used the same sacrificial method to exchange bodies with the banker's children, but the banker's real child was burned to death by them themselves. When the bodies of those two children reached the age of 60, they exchanged bodies with the current married couple through the same ceremony, and now it's Luke and Caroline again. And what cannot be taken care of now is the true Luke. As long as a suitable candidate can be found, the black couple can borrow their bodies to achieve immortality. In order to keep this secret, they fed the real Caroline a glass of identical liquid. Not long after, the police and Caroline's best friend rushed over. The real Caroline lay on a stretcher and wanted to ask for help from her, but because she drank the unknown liquid, she couldn't open her mouth. Fake Caroline did not show any flaws with Luke's cooperation, and the film ultimately ended in their eye contact.